Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. If you're new to this channel is a channel where we explore the subjects of healing childhood trauma, CPTSD, and all the various things in and around that, both on a social and individual level. And at times I'll be sharing my own journey in this process, as well as some of the things I've picked up and learnt along the way. So if you like that kind of content, please click on the like and subscribe button. I put out videos pretty regularly. Now, the subject of today's video, what we're going to be looking at in today's video, is I'm going to do a kind of a review or an analysis of an amazing website that you may be familiar with. It's very popular, called Soft White Underbelly by Mark Laiter. I think Later. I think I'm probably mispronouncing that. And this is a website I've been watching on and off for the past few years. It's a huge website. It's very popular. And the reason I'm looking at it in today's video is when it comes to the subject of healing childhood trauma, which is all what this YouTube channel is about. It's a website that brings a real spotlight onto the phenomena of what unhealed childhood trauma looks like where when you traumatize a child through either an abuse or neglect, what's the end result? And what you see on this website is exactly that. You see the end point of where all this actually leads in a lot of the interviews. Now, if you're not familiar with the website, it follows a very simple format. This is a man who's got a background in photography and obviously a lot of other things in this area. And his interview format is very simple. And what he's doing is interviewing people that we would describe on the kind of the fringes of society, or the underclass, or the unpeople. He works from a studio in Skid Row in Los Angeles, which seems to be the epicenter of addiction and homelessness. And he interviews just the people you'd imagine that would be there. He interviews a lot of drug addicts, prostitutes, where there's obviously a crossover of that, drug dealers. He interviews a really broad range of people, from what you perceive as the victims, from prostitutes and drug addicts, to the villains, in inverted commas, the drug dealers, the pimps, just everything. And he follows this format in his interviews that is very simple. He seems to just, and I've watched a lot of his videos, and they seem to follow this same beginning, which is he asks him, where did you grow up? And then he immediately says, tell us about your childhood. Did you grow up with both parents? Tell me about your childhood. And the moment he asks that question, and depending on the openness and the articulation of the person, there you start to see that some of these stories are so, the only way I could describe it is so harrowing and tragic and heartbreaking. And some of them I've watched all the way through, because I feel almost like I owe it to that person to just hear their story out. And others I've just had to turn off, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that's had that experience. It's just too much. It's just so painful to witness it, to hear it, that what they've been through and where they've ended up. And what you see very clearly is there is no one I've seen him interview that ends up a prostitute at age 21 or 23 with a fentanyl addiction or speed addiction or heroin addiction that hasn't come from some kind of childhood trauma at all. And even the drug dealers and the pimps and all the other people on the other side of that kind of equation also have harrowing stories and difficult upbringings. So what you see when it comes to childhood trauma is the severity of the trauma seems to be very much related to the severity of their addiction and the severity of where they end up. And the more traumatized, the more abused, the more neglected, the more there seems to be a straight line from that to that. So I think what's interesting about this channel is it's just very inarguable. It's very much, you just hear these stories and draw that direct line. The other thing that's interesting about what this channel reveals from a social point of view is, in my last 20 years I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Europe, in Spain, and I've obviously lived in Australia where I'm from. And the severity of the homelessness and drug addiction just doesn't seem to be as bad. It's there, and I'm sure there are just as equally harrowing stories in the places I've just mentioned. But you can also see in America, for such a wealthy country, that lack of social care and that social safety net, that it's just the ability to slip through the cracks just seems a lot easier. And I think what I see there in these videos in Soft White Underbelly is the result of very traumatic childhoods, and also a society that is so uncaring, and so like the citizenship, or the sense of, we all have a duty to each other and we pay our taxes so everyone's looked after. It just doesn't seem to be there in America in the way it certainly, particularly in Europe. I mean, there's just that homelessness problem just doesn't exist in Spain in that way. So I think it also points to when you get to a society where people are like, if it's not my problem, it's not my problem, then you see these problems. And what's interesting is one of the people he's interviewed, the sister of a lady he interviewed who died of a drug overdose, in one of her videos, she was talking about the cost of homelessness and saying that it costs California over $100,000 every year per homeless person. Just the cost of them being hospitalized and policed and jailed, and just everything that's involved in doing nothing is costing $16 billion a year to do nothing. So there's this massive social cost that it seems to be they're just pushing out and pushing out further, that's creeping back up more and more and more. And obviously every person you see is someone's daughter and someone's son, so there's this emotional social cost. And it's just, it's really hard to watch a lot of these stories. Now, there are some stories that don't necessarily are directly related to childhood trauma. I saw an interview with a police officer that ended up corrupt, and his story isn't necessarily about that. Although some lines with that, but particularly the drug addicts and prostitutes he interviews, and the homeless people there, is very much related to that. And I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about this channel is, why is it so popular? Like, what is it about his format and this process of sharing these stories that's so popular? There's, I think, over 3 million subscribers. I think he's had over 700 million, close to 1 billion views. So what is it? And my feeling, at least from my experience, is we have a craving for authentic stories. Like we are so saturated by stories that are so fake and so not real. From Hollywood to Instagram, we're being presented with these stories that are manufactured, that are curated, that are shaped about getting a response. And what you get in Soft White Underbelly is just raw, real, authentic stories, often of pain and hardship. And look, there's stories of love in there as well when you see the families interviewed, and you see these people struggling. As someone that suffered quite severe addiction, I watch the addiction interviews and I feel it. And I've just, by the grace of God and family and a few things, I was only a couple of steps away from being in that very place. And you feel the struggle, and you feel that pain, and just what they're going through. And you hear it, and there's just something so human about that, and something so real. So I also feel like as a creator, or as the person Mark Later, who's created this website, he's tapped into something that people are craving for, real stories, to really listen to people's stories. And watching a couple of interviews with him, and I'll post those interviews in the description, his purpose for this seems to be along those lines, that he arrived at a point where he seemed to have done well financially. He worked in the advertising industry and made a lot of wealthy people wealthier, and he wanted to do something that had a legacy that had a bit more meaning. So he's embarked on this journey, and it seems obviously taken off, and I can understand why. And I think also an amazing thing about this YouTube channel is just the fact that someone like this has done that. You have what appears to be a very sincere and genuine person, not doing something for anything other than the act of doing it, the awareness of the necessity that these stories need to be told. A light needs to be shined on these people. A mirror needs to be held up. And the other thing that this website does is just, these are real people, and it's impossible to witness these stories, to hear these stories, and not to feel empathy and compassion, and also a sense of outrage. Like, how is it that it's been left like this? How are these people being forced and pushed into these positions? It's just really sad. But at times we need to hear it. We were so sanitized from this pain. We're so numbed and distracted from it. It's just really, it's a certain kind of medicine to hear these stories. And like I said before, a lot of times I can't watch them all the way through, but I do other times, because we need to hear authentic stories, and we need to see the reality of where we've become, of what have we become as a society where this can happen to people. And some of them are so just heartbreaking, I think is the only word for it. From one human to another, just feeling like, wow. And it must be hard for him to hear these stories and not want to help everyone. And he's got I'll put a link into it. There's a place you can donate to something he's setting up to help a lot of the people involved in this. And I think it's an amazing project, and I think it speaks to where we're at. It speaks to what we need. And certainly as someone who works in the trauma field, childhood trauma field, this really is as much evidence as you can get that when you neglect, abuse, hurt children, this is where their pain takes them. This is where you end up. Children that are loved, cared for, felt safe, are trusted, there's that they grow up in kindness, don't end up there. And in addition to that, you have an uncaring, unkind society in addition to that worships the individual, that worships profit over everything else, where the sense of community is completely eroded, citizenship's gone, and this is what's going to happen. This is a window into what I should be expecting in Australia. This is where Australia's going. It's where a lot of Europe's going. We should look to America and say, we don't want to end up there. But to do that, we have to care for people, and channels like this help that. They help invoke a deep sense of compassion and concern for our fellow human beings. So my advice is, if you don't know this channel, scroll down. I'll put all the links into some of the videos. Have a watch some of the interviews with him, and listen. Just listen and hear, and I'm sure you'll be touched, moved and affected by these stories. And I hope it invokes the kind of compassion that it should invoke. And have a look and check it out. Look, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for taking the time to come and have a look. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Take care, and all the best. Bye bye.